darkness of the night was so deep that it was as if someone had cast a black shroud over the universe. And when Zuba's car stopped on this deserted mountain road, he felt that silence also had its own terrible sound that began to pierce the ear. The raindrops were ringing on the roof of the car like the nails of a dead man, and with every clap of lightning, the ancient mansion in front of him appeared like a giant mansion, its windows staring at Zubair like blind eyes. As soon as he got out of the car, a gust of cold air made his soul tremble, and he felt as if thousands of unseen hands were pulling him towards them in the darkness. The main door of the mansion, which was made of centuries-old wood, and on which carvings like human skulls were embossed, opened with such a horrible creaking sound as if a thirsty throat had cried out for water after years. As soon as he stepped inside, he felt that the air there was it's not just dust, but the smell of someone's suffering and decay lingers. The grand chandelier in the middle of the hall, which had now become nothing more than a home for spider webs, began to move on its own, and its shadows began to dance on the walls, resembling ghosts. When Zuba shone his flashlight on the left wall, he felt the faces of the people in the family photos. They're changing. Their smiles were now turning into horrible laughter, and thick black blood was dripping from their eyes and falling onto the floor. The wooden floor creaked with every step as if Zubair was stepping on someone's chest. Suddenly, he heard the sound of someone's heavy footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, there was only the same endless darkness that was now slowly swallowing him. The sound of nails scratching the wall from the direction of the kitchen had now become so loud that Zubair could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He felt like the walls of the mansion were slowly shrinking and he was being crushed between them. When he plucked up the courage to push the kitchen door open instead of his own reflection on the copper pots there, he saw a monstrous woman with her hair crawling on the ground like snakes, and the footprints of her inverted feet were made of fresh blood on the floor. The scourge, whose breath was now felt on Zubair's neck, called out Zubair's name in a terrifying voice that was not human but came from the silence of a cemetery. Zubair tried to run away, but his feet were as if embedded in the floor. And at that moment he realized that he had come to this mansion, not as a guest, but as its sustenance. Drops of blood were now dripping from the walls, and with each drop falling, a new scream rose in the air that was suspending Zubair's senses. This was just the beginning, because every corner of this mansion was now hunting him like a living hunter. I was ready to get hitched, and the night was still very long. In the suffocating atmosphere of the kitchen, Zubair had difficulty breathing because the presence of this monster in front of him had brought the temperature of the room below freezing. The sound of his name echoing in his ears was piercing his nerves like a sharp dagger. When he gathered his courage and looked behind him, there was no physical being there. But the shadow cast on the wall was that of some invisible creature, whose hands were unnaturally long and whose fingers were curved like the claws of an eagle. When Zubair wanted to take a step to leave, he felt that the wood of the floor was no longer wood, but had become soft and sticky like a living being that was pulling his shoes into itself. Suddenly, a thick black liquid fell from the corner of the ceiling onto his shoulder, the smell of which was so strong that Zubair began to choke. When he looked up, his scream died in his throat because the woman on the ceiling was hanging upside down like a lizard. Its black hair waving like snakes was touching Zubair's face, and its eyes, which were only white eyes, showed no mercy. When this scourge opened its mouth, the snarl coming from its jaws shook the old utensils in the hall, and Zubair saw his death dancing right in front of him. He somehow freed his feet from the swampy floor and ran towards a corridor. But the corridor was no longer ending. The faster he ran, the further away the door became, and the ancient pictures on the walls were now trying to get out of their places. The dead people in these pictures were pulling out their skeletal hands and tearing Zubair's clothes, and their voices were hammering Zubair's mind in the form of a meaningless noise. When the light spread throughout the house with a loud clap of lightning, Zubair saw that she was standing in front of him. The woman was now on the ground, and her inverted footprints were not only on the ground, but also on the walls and ceiling. As she got closer, the circle around Zubair was getting tighter, and he felt that every particle of the mansion was supporting this evil. When he ran into a closed room and closed the door and leaned his back against it, he heard the sound of someone's nails scratching wood from the other side. It was the same sound he could hear from outside, but now it was coming from right behind the door. When Zubair shone his flashlight on the mirror in the room, he saw his reflection there. But the feet of this reflection were also inverted, and his face was gradually becoming distorted and becoming like the evil. He realized that this mansion was not only scaring him, but was slowly turning him into a ghost like itself. When he looked at his hands, black lines were appearing on them, and his flesh was separating from his bones and melting. In this extreme of fear, he banged his head against the wall to wake up from this nightmare. But the truth was that he was now trapped in a trap where even death was about to become a regret for him. The woman's laughter echoed from the corner of the corridor, which sounded like a metal sheet rubbing, and at the same time, the only window in the room also slammed shut with a loud bang. Now Zubair was not alone in this dark room, but that terrifying shadow was standing right in front of him, stretching out its arms to embrace him, and the arching of its inverted feet had now become synchronized with the beating of Zubair's own heart. This terror was no longer just around him, but was embedded within his being, and there was no one to save him. Zubair was suffocating in the suffocating atmosphere of the room, and darkness was beginning to fall before his eyes. But as soon as he gathered his courage and opened an ancient wooden box in the corner of the room, the dust coming out of it immediately engulfed the entire room, and he found a rotten leather-bound book at the bottom of the box whose pages felt like human skin. As soon as he opened the book, the walls of the mansion suddenly started shaking, and he began to hear the screams of thousands of people inside his mind, which took him to the bloody history of this mansion where 200 years ago, a magician had slaughtered his entire family for his eternal life and poured their blood into the foundations of this mansion. When Zubair turned the next page of the book with trembling hands, there was an image of the same old woman who was actually the daughter of the magician whom he had sacrificed first, and now that same spirit was the guardian of this mansion. She hunted everyone who set foot here. Zubair now understood that those upside-down feet were actually a sign that this soul-esque connection with this world had been severed, and that it was now trapped in the cycle of reversed time. The letters of the book suddenly started moving, and like black insects, they came out of the paper and crawled over Zubair's hands, which made him feel as if someone had placed burning coals on his body. At that moment, the mirror in the room shattered with a loud explosion, and in each broken piece, he could see the face of the magician who was calling Zubair to him, with a devilish laugh. Zubair felt that his own shadow had left him, and that shadow was now dancing independently on the wall and trying to squeeze Zubair's throat. He struggled and beat his hands and feet to save himself when the book came into his hands, on the last page of which there was a pattern made in blood, and below it was written that there was a way to get rid of this scourge. The only way out was to find his own bones and set them on fire, buried in the secret basement of the mansion. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and Zubair saw that the old woman was now standing on his head, her long black nails touching Zubair's forehead, causing the flesh there to turn black. Zubair pushed the creature away with all his strength and ran out of the room towards the corridor, where pools of blood were now forming on the floor and severed hands were emerging from them, trying to grab him by the ankles. He now saw a mysterious light coming from under the stairs, calling him to the basement, where the greatest fear of his life and the secret of death was hidden. In the whispers of the wind, he could now clearly hear that the mansion was preventing him from leaving, because once he knew its secrets, he could never return alive. Zubair's courage was responding, but the yearning to live forced him to climb this dark slope. He took a step towards the place where the smell of rotting flesh had now grown unbearable, and with each step he felt that he was not going into the depths of the earth but towards the edge of hell, where that creature was already there to give him a final welcome. The basement stairs looked like the open jaws of a dragon. As soon as he stepped on them, Zubair felt the pressure of the air crushing his lungs, and with each passing moment, the light from the flashlight was getting dimmer, as if the darkness itself was swallowing the light. When he reached the last step, the crunching sounds of bones breaking came from under his feet, piercing the silence. He saw that the entire basement was filled with human skeletons, their faces still distorted with grief, as if they had gone through some unspeakable agony at the time of death. In the very center of the room was a black stone grave, with footprints of upside-down feet made of fresh blood all around. And from there was the same stench that was chasing Zubair. Suddenly, the torches on the walls lit up on their own, and their blue flames gave the entire environment a demonic hue. When Zubair tried to remove the amulet from the grave, when he tread, he felt the same cold breath behind him, and with a strong blow, he was thrown against the wall. The old woman was now standing in front of him in all her horror. Her height was unnaturally reaching the ceiling, and the flesh of her face was melting and hanging from her jaws, while the hatred emanating from her white eyes was consuming Zubair's being. The creature let out a savage scream that made the walls of the basement shake, and blood started flowing from Zubair's ears. He stumbled and took out the copy of the book, and saw that in a tray inside the tomb, the remains of the creature that the sorcerer had imprisoned were kept. As soon as Zubair touched the tray, the creature dug its long nails into his chest. But Zubair, not caring about his life, lit a match and showed the remains fire. As soon as the fire flared up, the creature retreated with a terrible pang, and black smoke began to pour from its entire body. The creature that was slowly taking on human form, the souls that had been imprisoned in the mansion for years, were now attacking. The plague and the air in the basement was filled with their screams and laughter. Hubert saw that the plague's twisted legs were now straightening, and its face was returning to the shape of the girl who had been slaughtered 200 years ago. The flames were now engulfing the entire basement, and the structure of the mansion was breaking, as if an old wound had opened. Zubair ran towards the stairs to get out, but he felt that the plague was still calling him. This time there was no terror in its voice, but a plea that forced Zubair to stop. But the rubble of the mansion had begun to fall, and the floor was sinking downwards. He felt that the earth would swallow him up, but he gathered his last strength and jumped upwards from where the lightning flashed. His whole body was burning. He was exhausted and his senses were leaving him, but he knew that if he didn't get out of this fire today, he too would become part of the structures that were now pulling his feet towards them. Zubair miraculously reached the hole from the burning fire of the basement and the falling debris. He felt that perhaps he had been freed from the clutches of death. The torrential rain outside had stopped now, and the yellow moonlight coming from behind the clouds was scattering a sad light on the broken pillars of the mansion. Zubair staggered towards the main door with staggering steps, and as soon as he stepped on the wet soil outside, a deep and cold sigh escaped from his chest, which he considered the last victory of his life. He ran to his car, which was still parked there on the side of the road. As soon as he started the engine, he saw the burning structure of the mansion in the rearview mirror of the car, which was now slowly turning into a pile of ashes. But as soon as he increased the speed of the car, he felt that the heat of his body was not going away, but his hands were still cold as ice, and his whole being was in a state of shock. It was shaking like a deep shock. Suddenly, the same old growl came from the car radio, and the same woman's voice was heard again, now humming like a lullaby. Zubair's heart started beating fast, and when he fixed his eyes on the road in front again, he realized that the road was not taking him to the city, but back to the same hill where the mansion stood. He panicked and applied the brakes and got out of the car and looked at his hands. His senses were blown away because the same black lines on his hands were now complete, and his nails had become unnaturally long and black. He suddenly remembered the diary in which it was written that he who learns the secret of this mansion becomes a part of it himself. He saw his reflection in a nearby puddle of water. It was not Zubair, but the same terrible evil standing there, with its feet turned upside down, and the pain of eternal imprisonment in its eyes. He realized that in that fire in the basement, he had burned not the evil, but his humanity, and the soul that had been wanting to be free for 200 years had now taken over. Zubair Isabadi set out towards the city, while Zubair's own soul was now imprisoned in that pile of ashes. As soon as the first ray of the sun appeared, the burning ruins of the mansion disappeared and only a barren land remained there. But Zubair was no longer there. He had now become a prisoner of the memories of that mansion that would wait at that same turn to mislead every passing traveler. A new board was now placed on the side of the road which read no further travel but the passing travelers. Did not know that that turn would never end, and Zubair's laughter had now become part of the winds of the forest forever, which would rise every night in search of a new prey.